Welcome to this deep dive all about TSMC. You wanted to know more about this company, and we're going through some excerpts from a document all about it. It's actually called Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company Limited. So, pretty straightforward title. It's a name that you might not have heard of,
Yeah,
but I bet you it's behind a lot of the tech that you use every day.
absolutely. TSMC's impact is kind of huge, even though they fly under the radar for a lot of people.
For sure. I was reading that back in 2017, their market value actually went above Intel's for a while.
Wow.
Like, that really blew my mind. What do you make of that?
Well, that shift was pretty significant.
Yeah.
I think it really signaled a change in the balance of power in the semiconductor world.
Mm.
TSMC's model of focusing solely on making chips that were designed by other companies proved to be a really winning strategy.
Okay.
They could be more agile and responsive to the always changing demands of tech.
So before we dive in any deeper, I think we should probably break down what this pure play foundry model even means, because it seems like it's like key to their whole operation.
Oh, it's fundamental to their success. Imagine a company that doesn't design their own chips.
Yeah.
Okay? But they act as like this specialized factory. They're building chips designed by other companies to their specifications.
Uh-huh.
That's TSMC in a nutshell, a pure play foundry. This laser focus that they have on being excellent manufacturing has made them the top choice for a lot of companies, like Apple, AMD, Qualcomm,
Mm-hmm.
basically anyone who needs high-performance chips.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
So how did this company that like most people have never heard of even become this influential? How big of a player is TSMC in the semiconductor world?
They are massive.
Right.
The largest dedicated independent semiconductor foundry in the world.
Wow.
Yeah. And not only that, they're also currently the world's most valuable semiconductor company.
Wow.
They're making chips for almost every tech giant you can think of.
Yeah.
And on top of that, TSMC accounts for a big chunk of Taiwan's entire GDP.
It's incredible. It's mind-boggling when you actually think about how wide their reach is. But this wasn't some overnight success story.
Right. How did TSMC actually evolve from this relatively unknown player to the global powerhouse that they are today?
You're right. It's a very interesting journey. It all started way back in 1987 with a leader named Morris Chang. He saw the potential of a dedicated semiconductor foundry, this pure play model, long before it became the industry standard.
I'm trying to imagine him pitching this idea, back in the 80s
Oh, yeah.
and how revolutionary it must have seemed at the time.
It was a very different landscape. And actually, he faced a lot of resistance initially. Even established companies like Texas Instruments and Intel. They weren't really convinced by his vision at first.
So how did he get TSMC off the ground with all this pushback? I mean, there must have been something else, some other piece of the puzzle.
There was, and it came in the form of the Taiwanese government.
They really saw how important the semiconductor industry could be strategically and decided to fully back TSMC. This support from the government was absolutely crucial in those early days. And it really speaks to how deeply connected TSMC's story is with the economic and even political landscape of Taiwan.
That's really interesting. So they had this groundbreaking vision. They had this essential backing from the government. But how did they go from there to actually being the dominant force that they are today?
Their rise to power is really a story of consistent innovation and these really strategic global partnerships.
Okay.
They've invested heavily in research and development, and they always make sure to stay on the leading edge of semiconductor tech.
Speaking of innovation, they were the first to come out with those super tiny 7-nanometer and then 5-nanometer process nodes, right?
Yep.
I was reading about that, but honestly, it's hard to picture how small that is and what it even means for technology.
It's really mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So think of it this way. These process nodes are like the teeny tiny building blocks of a chip.
Mm-hmm.
The smaller that nanometer size, the more transistors we can fit onto one chip. And the more transistors you have, the faster and more powerful the chip becomes.
Okay.
It's literally like fitting billions of these tiny transistors onto something the size of your fingernail.
Wow, that puts it in perspective. And all of those advancements have really led to the chips that power the devices that we all use every day. Like, it's crazy to think that TSMC is making all of these incredibly complex components.
They are. Take the chips in your phone, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, they can handle such complex tasks like high-res gaming, real-time video editing, all because of TSMC's super advanced manufacturing processes.
Yeah.
And to get to that level of complexity, TSMC was also an early adopter of EUV lithography.
I remember that being like a huge deal in the tech world. But can you remind me what even makes EUV lithography so important?
It's kind of this game-changer tech that's essential for making these really complex chips.
Okay.
Imagine using a super precise laser to carve these tiny patterns onto these silicon wafers. That's essentially what EUV lithography is doing.
Wow.
It's like a high-tech sculptor working at the nanoscale.
So that explains how they make such small but powerful chips. But it also makes me think about how big their operations must be. Like, I'm imagining these huge facilities everywhere.
Oh, they do. They're called fabs, and they're truly massive.
Okay.
Building a new one can cost billions and billions of dollars.
Wow.
TSMC has multiple fabs across the globe just churning out chips to keep up with the demand of the tech industry. And their global presence isn't just about meeting that demand. It's also because of the complex geopolitical landscape.
That makes sense. With all this talk about the tension, particularly between Taiwan and mainland China,
Exactly.
it seems like TSMC would want to be a little more spread out,
Right.
Yeah.
It's a way to manage that risk. By diversifying their production geographically, they're creating a more resilient supply chain. It's like a backup generator for the entire tech world.
I wonder, though, isn't setting up these massive fabs in new locations incredibly difficult and expensive? I'm imagining there are a lot of hurdles.
There definitely are. Building and operating state-of-the-art fabs like these takes a ton of investment. Not just money, but expertise and infrastructure, too. But for TSMC, it's something they have to do to ensure their stability in the long run.
And it seems like governments all over the world want them to set up shop there. Why is that?
It goes beyond just the economics. Governments are realizing that making semiconductors is becoming essential for national security and technological independence. They don't want to have to rely on other countries for these vital components.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like that saying, control the chips, control the world. So where does that put TSMC? Are they caught in the middle of all of this?
It's a very delicate balance. They have to keep up good relationships with governments globally while sticking to their core mission, which is providing advanced chip manufacturing to whoever needs it.
So they can't really play favorites.
Not really. They have to stay neutral. It's a testament to their skill and diplomacy that they've managed to navigate this complex landscape so effectively.
It seems like their success has kind of made them a major player in geopolitics, whether they wanted to be or not.
It's a really unique position to be in, but they seem to be handling it well. They've built a really strong reputation for being reliable and trustworthy, which has earned them the respect of governments and companies worldwide.
It's pretty amazing how a company focused on something that seems so technical, tiny chips, has become so central to what's happening globally.
It shows the power of technology and how it's a part of every single aspect of modern life. Okay, so we've talked about the geopolitical stuff. What other hurdles does TSMC have to think about as they look to the future?
Right.
Well, the semiconductor industry is always changing. There's increasing competition from companies like Samsung, who are also investing a lot of money into these advanced technologies.
So it's a constant race to stay ahead.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just competition. There are also these technological hurdles that they have to figure out. Developing the next generation of chips like the 2-nanometer and 1-nanometer nodes, that's getting more and more complex and way more expensive.
It's like they're trying to create something impossibly small.
Yeah.
Are we even close to hitting the limits of what's physically possible?
Some experts think that we might be approaching the limits of Moore's law,
Right.
which has kind of been the guiding principle of the semiconductor world for a long time. It basically says that the number of transistors on a chip will double roughly every 2 years. But as transistors get smaller and smaller, like down to the atomic level, it's becoming harder to maintain that rate of progress.
So if Moore's law is slowing down, does that mean innovation in computing is going to stop too? What happens then?
Not necessarily. There are other ways to innovate. Beyond just shrinking transistors, we're seeing progress in things like 3D chip stacking, which is where you stack a bunch of chips vertically to create even more powerful processors. It's like building a skyscraper, but for chips.
Wow. So even if we hit a wall with how small we can make things, there are still other ways to make chips more powerful.
Exactly. And TSMC is also exploring new materials like graphene and carbon nanotubes. These could potentially change how we design chips entirely and lead to even bigger improvements in speed and energy efficiency.
Sounds like the future of computing is full of surprises. But all this cutting-edge research, I can't imagine it's cheap.
Oh, you're right. It's super expensive. TSMC needs to make enough money to fund all of this research and development, but they also have to keep their prices competitive so that they can stay ahead of rivals like Samsung.
Right.
It's a really complex balance to strike.
It sounds like a really high-stakes game with the entire tech world watching.
The stakes are definitely high.
Yeah.
not just for TSMC, but for the entire industry. The decisions they make in the next few years are going to really shape the future of computing. And that has a ripple effect on everyone.
You know, before we started this whole deep dive, I thought TSMC was just another tech company, but it's pretty clear that they're a lot more than that. They're driving global innovation, and they're playing this crucial role in building the future of tech.
They really are. Their story is fascinating. It's this mix of technological innovation, economic influence, and geopolitical strategy. It just goes to show that technology isn't just about gadgets and gizmos, you know?
Yeah.
It's about the people behind it, the decisions they make, and how those decisions can impact everything around us.
That's a great point. And speaking of impact, I can't help but wonder, with all this talk about global supply chains and geopolitics, how does TSMC, being a major player in the semiconductor industry, actually affect me, like the listener? You know, it's easy to think about the big picture and forget about the individual.
That's a really important question.
Mm.
And it's something we can explore further in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so stay tuned because we're going to dive into that next.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of TSMC. You know, before the break, we were talking about TSMC's impact on the world, and you left us with a pretty interesting question.
Yeah. How does all of this actually affect me, the listener? You know, it's easy to get lost in the big picture and kind of forget about how it impacts us individually.
It's a really important question to think about, because in the end, technology is supposed to work for us, not the other way around.
Right.
So let's try to connect the dots between what TSMC does in the semiconductor world and your everyday life.
Okay, I'm ready to connect those dots. What's the link between these super advanced chips and my own experiences?
Just think about all the devices that you use every day. Your smartphone, your laptop, your car. Maybe you have a smart fridge or even a voice assistant at home. All of those things rely on semiconductors.
Yeah.
And there's a good chance a lot of those chips were made by TSMC.
So they're kind of like quietly powering my modern life, even though I don't really think about the chips inside these gadgets very often.
Exactly. They're kind of like the unsung heroes of our digital age. You know,
Yeah.
they're the ones making the technology that connects us, entertains us, and honestly makes our lives a lot easier.
But it's not just about the devices themselves, right? It's about what we can actually do with them.
You got it. Think about how TSMC's chips have helped things like social media to explode, or how mobile gaming has become so popular, or even the whole growth of cloud computing. They've had a huge impact on how we communicate, how we work, how we get information, even how we think.
It's like this massive chain reaction. TSMC makes the chips power the devices lead to all these new technologies and experiences, and then those things completely change the world.
Exactly. And that pace of change is only getting faster. As TSMC keeps pushing the limits of what's possible with these chips, those innovations are going to keep spreading out and creating new possibilities that we can't even imagine right now.
So we've established that TSMC is super important in both the tech world and in our own lives. But where do they go from here? What's next for them with all the challenges and opportunities ahead?
That's the big question, isn't it? We talked about all the geopolitical stuff, the growing competition, and how expensive it is to innovate. But even with all of that, TSMC is known for being resilient and adaptable.
Right. They've always found a way to get past obstacles and come out on top. So what are they focused on now? What's on the horizon for them?
One thing they're investing a lot in is advanced packaging technologies. Imagine building these 3D skyscrapers of chips, stacking them up vertically to create even more powerful and efficient processors.
So even if we hit a limit on how small we can make transistors, there are still ways to fit more power into a smaller space.
Exactly. It's about being creative and finding new ways to keep pushing those limits. And besides advanced packaging, TSMC is looking into new materials too, like graphene and carbon nanotubes. These materials could revolutionize how we design chips, leading to big jumps in speed and how efficiently they use energy.
That's pretty mind-blowing. It sounds like the future of computing is going to be even more incredible than what we're seeing now.
It really is an exciting time to be watching this industry. But remember, all this innovation comes at a cost. Developing this tech is super expensive, like we talked about.
Billions of dollars just for one fab, right?
Right? So how can TSMC keep up with all these rising costs? It's especially with the competition getting tougher.
Yeah, how do they manage all that?
It's a balancing act. They have to make enough money to fuel all of their research and development, but they also can't forget about their prices. They have to stay competitive to keep their spot as the leader. It requires making smart decisions, careful planning, and really understanding the global market.
It sounds like they're walking a tightrope.
The stakes are definitely high, not just for TSMC, but for the entire industry. What they do over the next few years is going to shape what computing looks like. And that's going to have a big impact on everyone.
You know, when we started this deep dive, I really didn't get how fascinating and complex the world of semiconductors was. It's amazing to think that something as small as a chip can have such a huge impact on our lives.
It really is a testament to human ingenuity and how powerful technological innovation can be. TSMC's story is a great reminder that technology isn't just about the technical stuff. It's about the people who are creating it, the decisions they make, and the huge consequences of those decisions.
That's a really great point. And to bring it back to your earlier question about how this all affects the listener, I think it's clear that TSMC's work is a part of pretty much every aspect of our digital lives.
Yeah,
From the phones in our pockets to the cloud services we rely on to the cars we drive, TSMC is quietly shaping the world around us in a really powerful way.
absolutely. And as technology keeps evolving faster and faster,
Hmm.
it's important for us to understand what's driving it all. You know, learning about companies like TSMC, their innovations, the challenges they face, and their role in the big picture can help us all navigate this complex digital world with a little more awareness and insight.
I think that's a great takeaway. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of TSMC. I hope you found it as insightful and thought provoking as I have.
It's been a pleasure sharing these insights with you. And remember, the story of TSMC is still being written. You know, the choices they make, the new things they create, the challenges they overcome, it's all going to keep shaping the world of technology for years to come.
And that's what makes it so fascinating. It's a story that's constantly evolving. So keep learning, keep asking those questions, and keep exploring the world of technology. Until next time, thanks for listening.